Hi everyone, I'm Neel. Today I'll be talking about our work on quantifying uncertainty and finding where the uncertainty is in multimodal foundation models. So this work is obviously in joint with my co-authors listed over here. I'll start by saying that multimodal foundation models provide a natural interface for performing perception and planning in robotic tasks. So in particular, they can produce plans that can meet specifications. However, addressing uncertainty in these foundation models has become a critical bottleneck. So you may ask where this uncertainty comes from. Particularly, it may come from perception or decision making. In perception, that might arise from artifacts in the image, for example, or lighting conditions or occlusion of objects. In decision making, this may arise from prompt image inconsistency or failure to capture certain critical information in the image or failure to meet some specifications. With that, the central question that we try to address is how can we design automated and reliable a framework that can enable uncertainty quantification with targeted interventions to reduce this uncertainty in planning and perception. Existing works in this space try to produce an aggregate or black box estimate of uncertainty, which fails to capture where the uncertainty really lies. And because of that, it hinders targeted improvements, which oftentimes requires a lot of human labeling, which is not scalable. This is one of the existing works from DeepMind that tries to perform this aggregate uncertainty estimate. However, it doesn't try to quantify where exactly the uncertainty lies. And so I'll cut to the chase. The main contribution that we try to provide over here is disentangle this uncertainty in the multimodal foundation models into two types. One is perception, the other one is decision. And we present novel quantification methods, specifically conformal prediction, as well as formal methods-driven prediction, leveraging symbolic representations and formal methods techniques to provide a two-part improvement strategy that reduces the variability of the outputs of these foundation models by about 40%, as well as increase the task specification compliance. So here's a brief outline. I'll go over the framework as well as how we exactly quantify these two types of uncertainty, and then talk about the targeted interventions, as well as some experimental results and takeaways. So here's the overview of the framework. We actually have two modes in the framework. One is online, the other one is offline. So online, we try to perform something called active sensing, where we switch between different cameras. For example, yesterday, if some of you were here, you probably saw the Waymo car. We have access to multiple cameras. How do we switch between different cameras based on this uncertainty? And offline, we can perform efficient fine-tuning of these VLMs, for example, using this uncertainty because we know where exactly this uncertainty lies. So I'll go into each of these topics. However, first I'll talk about perception uncertainty and what exactly that is. So let's take an example. Let's say the user wants to obtain at least 80% probability of correctly identifying objects in the scene. We can leverage conformal prediction, which is essentially a method that gives theoretical guarantees on whether or not the output meets the ground truth label. So here what we can look at is the softmax output with respect to each of the classes, and we can get a histogram of these. And based on the histogram, we can obtain a quantile that corresponds to a non-conformity score, which is essentially a calibrated score. And conversely, you can actually have this confidence score and then retrieve the probability, which is what we actually want to do in the real world. So the perception uncertainty score is defined as essentially a theoretical lower bound on the probability of correctly identifying the objects in the scene. Whereas the decision uncertainty is defined as essentially a score that is reflecting a theoretical lower bound on the plan that is generated by the VLM that satisfies certain specifications. So the specifications could be in different types of language. For example, we can specify that in LTL format, linear temporal logic, where let's say a decision uncertainty score may correspond to, let's say, 0.7, meaning at least 70% probability that a plan satisfies some specifications you define. However, a question is, how do you verify that this natural language satisfies these specifications? And I'll get into that in just a bit. But for the time being, let's say we want to perform automated fine-tuning of this model, and we have access to a data set which contains images and task prompts. Let's say you query a sample image from that as well as a task prompt. You pass it to this vision encoder in the VLM and obtain embeddings on top of which you can run conformal prediction to get the perception uncertainty, and only pass samples that have a perception uncertainty below a certain threshold to the text generator, which then produces a high-level plan. And then how do you verify this plan? What we do is we convert this into a finite state machine, essentially an automaton that represents certain propositions and actions, which then we can use techniques from formal methods to verify whether it meets certain specifications. Ultimately, what we want to do here is curate a high-quality data set, which we can then use to fine-tune this model, and then perform recalibration. So let's take an example. Let's say I have an image obtained from an autonomous vehicle, and I want to get the high-level steps to go straight at an intersection. So let's say a pre-trained VLM would give you certain steps, something like this. The traffic light is green, stop at the intersection, wait for the pedestrian, then move forward. And then there will be an associated confidence score with this. So we present in this paper an algorithm to convert this natural language description into this finite state machine, where we have each step corresponding to a state, and the transitions are essentially conditionals. And we can actually verify whether or not these finite state machine meets certain specifications. For example, over here, one of the specifications was not met. We don't want to stop at a green light when there are no pedestrians, for example. So after fine-tuning, for example, the output controller that we obtain may meet all of the specifications that we have. And that's what we want to include in our curated fine-tuning data set, which is a high-quality data set. So that's about fine-tuning offline. But online, we want to perform inference. Obviously, when we want to deploy that on a real-world system, we want to have this operating in real time. However, the text generator cannot be queried in real time. So we want to separate the perception loop from the decision-making loop. So what we do here is we look at the perception uncertainty. If the perception uncertainty is below a certain threshold, then we decide to perform active sensing and reduce the uncertainty. Until that uncertainty has been reduced, we keep on performing active sensing. Once that has been reduced, we query the text generator sparsely, which then produces a plan. And we have the decision uncertainty, as I mentioned earlier. If that is below a certain threshold, only then we go ahead and execute the plan. So this enhances the reliability of the plan that is being generated. And I'll go into some qualitative demonstrations. So we have actually 3 demonstrations. I'd like to note that our approach does not only apply to autonomous driving scenarios. It's applicable to any sort of autonomous system, for example, even a tabletop manipulation scenario. So on the top left, you will see there's a mobile robot equipped with the camera as well as other sensors. And we are tasked at turning right at this stop sign. So you'll see there are like multiple pedestrians on the left which cause a high uncertainty because of occlusion. And our model is able to understand that there's high uncertainty in the image, which allows us to stay still and reobserve until that uncertainty hasn't been reduced, and only then perform the querying to the text generator, which reduces the number of calls to the text generator we make. We also test this in another setting, for example, in tabletop manipulation. So here there is a camera equipped on the manipulator. The end effector is essentially clogged by the block that is picking, which causes high uncertainty. And then because we have access to multiple cameras, we perform active sensing and we switch to different cameras. Again, we arrive at another scenario where the block is essentially not seen because of the manipulator itself, which we then decide to go ahead and switch the camera view so that we can place it. We also tested in various simulation scenarios, and there are scenarios where we have a lot of occlusion. For example, there's a pedestrian on the bottom right, which has been occluded by this light post. And we detect that there's high perception uncertainty and switch to the side camera from the frontal camera, and then switch back to this front camera when the perception uncertainty reduces. In terms of quantitative results, we tested this on the raw model, which hasn't been fine-tuned with and without active sensing, as well as on the benchmark model, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the talk. as well as on our fine-tuned model. So what we noted is just with active sensing, without even fine-tuning, we can drastically improve the performance. But specifically, once we fine-tune the model, what we notice is we reduce the variability in the outputs of the model and increase the number of specifications that are satisfied. So this basically includes enhancing the reliability of the model. And as I alluded earlier, the key contribution here is we really disentangle the two types of uncertainty, which reduces the number of queries that we make to the model, as well as enable targeted interventions. One is active sensing, the other one is efficient fine-tuning. And ultimately, this allows us to reduce the number of queries and increase the number of specifications that are satisfied. So yeah, I would like to end here and stop for any questions that you may have.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So maybe like I'll clarify what I understood and then I'll ask the question. So firstly, like the idea is that you have these multiple sensors, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of these different sensors are going through a model and you're trying to understand from the model's score or uncertainty how to switch between the sensors, right? So does the model give any feedback as to which sensor should I choose? My first question is that, like based on the uncertainty. Secondly, that choosing of that sensor, is that done with a human in the loop, or is that also something driven by, let's say, some other ML framework which is continuously active? So those are my questions.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to mention one point before I answer a question. There are two parts. So one is active sensing, which allows you to switch between different sensors. The other one is offline fine-tuning. So offline fine-tuning allows us to curate this high-quality data set, which we fine-tune our model on. But to answer your question, we switch between the cameras by knowing where the uncertainty in the image is. For example, we had an example where there was a pedestrian that was blocked by a light post because of some occlusion. So depending on where the uncertainty lies in the image, let's say this was observed on the front camera, and this lies on the right side of the image, we can switch to the right camera based on what our platform provides, right? So this is what we use to switch between the sensors. And sorry, I didn't catch your second part. Your second part.
It is right side that you choose. That's based on still. So the right camera that is chosen, it is still like kind of like a human or some kind of a oracle taking the decision rather than like a ML model taking the decision. Is that my
No. So
right?
in this work, we do that in an automated manner. So depending on where the object is, we have access to the bounding box of the object. Depending on where the object is and our sensor configuration, we can decide to switch to different cameras. In this example, we had access to 3 cameras. So front camera, left camera, and right camera. So depending on where the object lies, we switch.